The engine sputters. Once, twice. A violent, shuddering cough that shakes the very bones of the young man strapped into the cockpit. He is barely a man, really. 19 years old, his face still holding the ghost of boyhood, now slick with a mixture of sweat and the fine mist of castor oil already spewing from the rotary engine just inches from his face. He can taste it on his tongue, a foul, greasy film that coats his throat. He can feel the vibration in his teeth, a high-pitched, angry buzz that promises to tear the machine apart at any moment. He grips the stick, his knuckles white against the worn leather. This is it, his first solo flight in a Sopwith Camel. He has heard the stories. Everyone has. They whisper them in the mess halls, in the barracks, in the quiet moments between training flights. They call it the Widowmaker. They say it has killed more of its own than the enemy has. He tries to push the thought away, to focus on the instructor's words, a litany of warnings and procedures that now feel like a distant, half-remembered dream. Easy on the throttle, lad. Let her come up to speed. Feel the rudder. Don't fight her. Dance with her. Dance with her? This vibrating, bucking beast of wood and wire. He takes a breath. The air thick with the smell of oil, petrol, and damp grass. He pushes the throttle forward. Too much, too soon. The engine doesn't just accelerate, it explodes with torque. The entire 9-cylinder block, spinning at over 1,000 RPM, acts like a giant gyroscope. The little biplane, all its weight, engine, guns, fuel, pilot, crammed into the first few feet of its frame, lurches violently to the right. It's not a turn, it's a snap, a brutal, instantaneous pivot that digs the right wingtip into the muddy airfield. For a horrifying eternal second, the world is a blur of green and brown. The plane cartwheels, a broken toy of wood, wire, and canvas. The sound is not a grand explosion, but a sickening crunch, a splintering of struts, a tearing of fabric. Then, silence. A silence more profound, more terrible than the engine's roar. A silence broken only by the gentle hiss of steam and the slow, steady drip of fuel onto the hot engine. Another one. Another wooden cross for the training field cemetery. Another name to be quietly struck from the roster. This was the brutal reality of the Sopwith Camel, an aircraft that offered its pilots a stark and unforgiving choice. As the saying went, it was a choice between a wooden cross, a red cross, or a Victoria Cross. Death, injury, or glory. And for hundreds of young men, the choice was made for them, not in the skies over Flanders, but on the muddy training fields of England, before they ever saw a single enemy plane. To understand why the Royal Flying Corps was willing to accept such a terrible price, we have to go back to the spring of 1917, to a month that would be forever seared into the memory of British aviation as Bloody April. The war in the air had turned into a massacre. The German air service, the Luftstreitkräfte, had unleashed a new and deadly weapon, the Albatros D-3. It was a sleek, powerful fighter, armed with twin synchronized machine guns, and it was flown by a new breed of highly trained, ruthlessly efficient pilots, organized into elite hunting squadrons, or JASTAs. The most famous of these was JASTA 11, led by the man who would become the most legendary ace of the war, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. Against this formidable force, the British were hopelessly outclassed. The Royal Flying Corps was still flying outdated, fragile aircraft like the B-E-2C. A stable but slow observation plane that was little more than a death trap in a dogfight. The life expectancy of a new RFC pilot on the Western Front plummeted to just 17 hours of flight time. Think about that for a moment. 17 hours. Less than a single day in the air, spread across a few weeks, and you were statistically dead. In the month of April alone, the British lost 245 aircraft in combat. Over 200 aircrew were killed or went missing. The Germans lost just 66 planes. It was a slaughter. The skies over the Battle of Arras belonged to the Germans. The British pilots knew they were being sent to their deaths. They climbed into their obsolete machines every morning, knowing that the odds of coming back were slim. The morale of the Royal Flying Corps was at its lowest point. Something had to change. Britain needed a miracle. It needed a fighter that could not just compete with the Albatros, but dominate it. It needed an aircraft that could turn the tide. That aircraft was the Sopwith Camel. When it arrived at the front in the summer of 1917, it looked like the answer to the RFC's prayers. It was small, pugnacious, and heavily armed with two 303 Vickers machine guns, mounted directly in front of the pilot, synchronized to fire through the arc of the propeller. The breech blocks of these guns, housed in a metal fairing, created a distinctive hump, which gave the aircraft its name, the Camel. But the Camel's most defining feature, the source of both its incredible strength and its fatal weakness, was its engine. Most aircraft, then and now, have a stationary engine that turns a propeller. The Camel had a rotary engine, typically a Clerget 9B, producing 130 horsepower, or a Larone, producing 110. In a rotary engine, the crankshaft is fixed to the airframe, and the propeller is bolted directly to the engine block. The entire mass of the engine, all 9 cylinders, weighing hundreds of pounds, rotates along with the propeller. This design had some advantages. It was compact, powerful for its weight, and the spinning cylinders created their own airflow, which meant it didn't need a heavy water cooling system. It was also relatively simple to manufacture, but it also had a catastrophic side effect: gyroscopic precession. The massive spinning weight of the engine acted like a giant gyroscope. This meant that any attempt to turn the aircraft was met with a powerful, counterintuitive force. If you tried to turn left, against the engine's rotation, the nose would try to climb, making the turn slow and clumsy. But if you turned right, with the engine's rotation, the gyroscopic effect would whip the plane around in a brutally fast, tight turn, while simultaneously forcing the nose down into a dive. The designers at Sopwith had leaned into this instability. They had deliberately concentrated all the major components: the engine, the twin machine guns, the fuel tank, and the pilot, within the first 7 feet of the aircraft. This made the Camel exquisitely sensitive, capable of changing direction with a speed that no other aircraft could match. In the hands of an experienced pilot, this was a war-winning advantage. In the hands of a novice, it was a death sentence. Arthur Harris, who would later become Marshal of the Royal Air Force and lead Bomber Command in World War II, flew Camels in the First World War. He had this to say about its handling: if you wanted to go into a left turn, you put on full right rudder, and if you let go of the stick, it looped. This was not a normal aircraft. This was a machine that defied every instinct, every lesson learned on more stable trainers. It required a complete rewiring of a pilot's reflexes. And so began the second, hidden war of the Sopwith Camel. A war fought not against the Germans, but against the aircraft itself. A war fought on the training fields of England, where hundreds of young men, fresh from basic flight instruction on more stable aircraft, were introduced to the Widowmaker. The accidents were horrifyingly frequent and depressingly similar. The primary killer was the torque of that massive rotary engine. A student pilot, used to a more forgiving machine, would apply power too quickly on takeoff. The immense rotational force would overwhelm his clumsy rudder inputs, and the aircraft would be flipped onto its back before it had even left the ground. The right wingtip would dig into the earth, and the plane would cartwheel, shattering into pieces. If the pilot was lucky, he would be killed instantly. If he was unlucky, he would be trapped in the wreckage, soaked in petrol, waiting for the inevitable spark. If he survived takeoff, the next great danger was the turn. An instinctive, gentle turn to the right could, in the blink of an eye, become a violent, uncontrollable snap roll, sending the aircraft into a spin from which a novice had no hope of recovering. The Camel spun like a top, and once it started, it was notoriously difficult to get out. From a low altitude, it was impossible. The ground rushed up, the world became a sickening blur. And then, impact. Then there was the engine itself. The rotary engine had no throttle in the modern sense. To control power, the pilot had a blip switch on his control stick, which allowed him to momentarily cut the ignition to some of the cylinders. This meant that flying the Camel was a constant, delicate balancing act of fuel mixture, air, and ignition. Get it wrong, and the engine would choke and die. And a stalled engine, at the low altitudes of training flights, was almost always fatal. And through it all, there was the castor oil. The only lubricant that could withstand the heat and friction of the rotary engine was castor oil. And the engine used a total loss lubrication system, meaning it constantly sprayed a fine mist of hot oil out into the slipstream. Since the pilot sat directly behind the engine, with no windscreen to protect him, he was constantly breathing in this atomized oil. Castor oil is a powerful laxative. Pilots were in a constant state of intestinal distress, suffering from diarrhea and nausea. They joked about it, of course. Gallows humor was the only way to cope. But it was no joke when you were thousands of feet in the air, in a cramped cockpit, with no way to relieve yourself. They were flying a machine that was actively trying to kill them, while simultaneously dealing with a severe case of food poisoning. The cockpit of a Camel was a claustrophobic, vibrating, noisy hell, filled with the fumes of burnt castor oil and the ever-present fear of a sudden, violent death. The numbers tell the story. Of the roughly 5,500 Camels built, 385 pilots were killed in training accidents. 413 were killed in combat. Almost as many men died learning to fly the Camel as died fighting in it. It was a brutal, unforgiving machine, a tool that seemed to hate its user. The training command knew they had a problem. Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Strange, who served with the Central Flying School, watched in horror as camel after camel spun down out of control, flown by students on their solo flights. He wrote in his memoirs, "In spite of the care we took, camels continually spun down out of control when flown by pupils on their solos." He realized that if students could somehow learn the camel with an experienced instructor in the same aircraft, these deaths could be significantly reduced. Working with Lieutenant Morgan, who managed the workshops, Strange developed a solution. They took the main fuel tank out of several camels and replaced it with a smaller one, which enabled them to fit in dual controls. They removed the guns to compensate for the added weight of a second person. The fuel and oil tanks were combined into one, reduced in size, and repositioned just aft of the firewall. Training flights lasted under 30 minutes usually, so a larger capacity tank was not needed. This training camel, as it came to be called, was distributed to all the major flying schools and significantly helped in reducing training accidents. But it could not eliminate them entirely. The camel was simply too dangerous. But for those who could survive the trial by fire, for those who could master the beast, The Camel was not a Widowmaker. It was a king. An experienced camel pilot learned not to fight the machine, but to dance with it. He learned to use its violent instability as a weapon. He understood that the camel's quirks were the key to its lethality. The most important lesson was this: never turn left. The slow, clumsy, climbing left turn was a death sentence in a dogfight. An expert pilot, when he needed to go left, would instead kick the rudder, throw the stick to the right, and let the gyroscopic torque whip him around in a lightning-fast 270-degree right-hand turn. He could complete 3/4 of a circle to the right, faster than any German pilot could make a simple 90-degree turn to the left. He was always one step ahead, always inside his opponent's turn, always in a position to bring his twin Vickers guns to bear. Elliot White Springs, an American fighter pilot who flew Camels with the 148th Aero Squadron, described the aircraft with a mixture of affection and exasperation. He called it a tricky little biplane. He said they would do about 90 miles per hour level, but you couldn't fly level because they would shake your teeth out in 40 seconds by the clock. You had to climb or glide. But, he added, they could fly upside down and turn inside a stairwell. This was the essence of the Camel. It was uncomfortable, exhausting, and dangerous. But it was also unmatched in agility. Springs went on to describe the Camel's strengths and weaknesses in combat. They would stall at 15,000 feet and lose 1,000 feet in a turn. But they were deadly below 5,000 feet if you could suck the Fokkers down to that level. The Camel was not a high-altitude fighter. It was a low-level brawler. In a dogfight down low, nothing could get away from it. Springs said, a camel could make a monkey out of an SE or a Fokker at treetop level, but it couldn't zoom and it couldn't dive. In the hands of these masters, the Camel became the most successful fighter of the entire war. It was responsible for 1,294 confirmed enemy kills, more than any other Allied aircraft. Men like the Canadian ace William George Barker became legends in their Camels. Barker flew a single Camel, serial number B6313, for over 379 hours of flight time, and shot down 46 enemy aircraft in that one machine. No other pilot in the war achieved such a record in a single aircraft. It was an unprecedented bond between man and machine. In one legendary engagement on October 27, 1918, Barker took on a formation of 15 German fighters. He was alone, deep behind enemy lines. He was wounded in the thigh by a bullet. Then he was hit again, in the other leg. Then a third time, shattering his elbow. He was losing consciousness, bleeding heavily, but he kept fighting. He shot down 4 German aircraft, before finally crash-landing his shattered Camel behind Allied lines. He survived, and was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor in the British Empire. This was the kind of courage the Camel demanded, and the kind of courage it inspired. Another Canadian, Roy Brown, is officially credited with shooting down the Red Baron himself, though the kill is still debated by historians. On the 21st of April 1918, Brown, flying his Camel, dived on the all-red Fokker triplane of Manfred von Richthofen, who was chasing another, less experienced pilot, Wilfred May. Brown fired a long burst from his Vickers guns, and the Red Baron's triplane faltered and crashed into a field near the Somme River. The greatest ace of the war, the man with 80 confirmed kills, had been brought down, and the Sopwith Camel had been the instrument of his demise. Whether it was Brown's bullets or fire from Australian machine gunners on the ground that killed Richthofen is still debated, but Brown was given the credit, and the Camel's legend grew. This was the paradox of the Sopwith Camel. It was a killer, a flawed, dangerous, unforgiving machine that took the lives of hundreds of its own pilots. It was a nightmare to fly, a vibrating, oil-spewing, claustrophobic cockpit that demanded constant, exhausting attention from its pilot. But it was also a war winner. Its unmatched agility, its powerful armament, and its ability to outturn any opponent made it the master of the dogfight. It cleared the skies of the Albatross menace, and it helped to turn the tide of the air war in favor of the Allies. The legacy of the Sopwith Camel is written in blood. The blood of the 1,294 enemy airmen it shot down, but also the blood of the 385 young men who died just trying to learn how to fly it. It was a machine that demanded the ultimate sacrifice, not just from its enemies, but from its friends. It represents a moment in history when the technology of war had outpaced the ability of human beings to control it. It was a beast, a monster, a Widowmaker. But it was also a savior. And for the men who flew it, who strapped themselves into that tiny cockpit and took to the skies, it required a special kind of courage. A courage to face not just the enemy in front of them, but the very real possibility that the machine they were flying was trying just as hard to kill them. Every time a Camel pilot climbed into that cockpit, he was making a choice. He was choosing to trust a machine that had killed hundreds of his fellow pilots. He was choosing to breathe in the poisonous fumes of castor oil, to endure the bone-shaking vibration, to fight the violent gyroscopic forces that wanted to flip him into the ground. He was choosing to become one with a weapon that was as dangerous to him as it was to the enemy. The Sopwith Camel was never an easy aircraft to fly. It was never forgiving. It demanded perfection, and it punished mistakes with death. But in the hands of a master, it was unstoppable. It was the aircraft that turned the tide of the air war, that broke the back of the German air service, that gave the Allies control of the skies. It was the aircraft that proved that courage, skill, and determination could overcome even the most deadly of machines. The men who flew the Camel were not just pilots. They were warriors, gladiators of the sky, who fought a two-front war, against the enemy, and against their own aircraft. And they won.